All right, let's get into this. We've got a really fascinating stack of material today.
All curated by you, the listener.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's focused on, well, maybe the question. The one that's been around forever.
For millennia.
Yes.
Philosophers, scientists, everyone is taking a crack at this one.
Right. How much of who we are is, baked into our biology,
Right?
and how much is shaped by, well, everything else. The world around us, it's the ultimate investigation into the self.
It really is the deepest human puzzle. Nature versus nurture. And what's so great about the sources you've gathered is that they just immediately throw out that old framing.
The versus part.
The versus part, exactly. They represent the modern scientific consensus, which, abandons that black and white thinking and jumps right into this incredibly nuanced dance between the two.
The conflict model is officially dead.
Officially, thank goodness.
So that's really where we have to start, isn't it? In the everyday language we all use. I mean, the hook for this whole deep dive is in those common phrases people use. Things like, oh, I'm just bad with names. That's just my nature. Or on the flip side, it's just how I was raised. That environment made me this way.
We all do it.
Sure.
We're trying to assign cause and effect to the most complicated thing we know,
Yeah.
a person.
Yeah.
And when you say those things, you're trying to explain these deep core parts of yourself. Your personality, your smarts, your talents, your moral compass even.
Your anxiety, or why you hate broccoli.
All of it. The whole package.
So the big philosophical and, well, scientific question under all that casual chat is this. How much of this entire structure, this you that's listening right now, full of strengths and quirks and all of it, comes from your biology, your wiring,
Nature.
versus the huge ocean of experience and culture and education and trauma that shaped you,
Nurture.
right?
And that is the inquiry. And it has these massive real-world implications, way beyond just a thought experiment. So I think our mission statement for this deep dive is maybe threefold.
Okay, lay it out for us.
First, let's get really clear on what nature and nurture actually mean in modern science. Second, we have to explore how they interact. Not just that they do, but the actual mechanisms.
The nitty-gritty.
The nitty-gritty. And third, and this is the most important part for you, the listener, is to understand what this modern interwoven view means for things like personal responsibility, education, and how you understand your own ability to change.
Okay, so before we get into those details, we absolutely have to set the record straight on one thing.
Yes, let's clear the air right away.
This deep dive is not here to ask if we are 100% nature or 100% nurture.
Because that question is, frankly, absurd. It's based on a false dichotomy that held back the science for decades.
It's a dead end.
It's a total dead end. We know empirically both forces are profoundly at play. I mean, to argue for 100% nature, you'd have to just deny the obvious impact of culture or poverty or trauma.
Or educate.
Right. And to argue for 100% nurture is just as ridiculous. It would mean denying that genetics determines your eye color or your height, or that there are powerful genetic links to conditions like, say, Huntington's disease.
So the old zero-sum game is over. We accept both are involved. So what are the real questions that modern science is asking now?
The whole focus is shifted. It's away from dividing up a pie chart and toward understanding the machinery of the interaction itself.
Okay.
So the real questions are, one, how exactly do they interact over a lifetime? Is it just A plus B, or do they multiply each other? Second, when you look at a specific trait, like, say, musical ability versus conscientiousness, does biology weigh more in one and environment in another?
Ah, so the recipe changes depending on what you're making.
Perfectly put. And finally, and this is the most vital question for self-understanding, given our starting point, our biology and our history, how flexible are we really? How much can we actually change?
And what are the limits?
Then what are the limits? That's where this all becomes incredibly personal.
All right, so let's define our terms, starting with nature. When we say nature, what exactly are we talking about? What's in that biological hand we're dealt?
Right. So nature, in the context of these sources, is much more than just a list of genes. It's really several interconnected layers of our built-in makeup.
So it starts with the genes, the DNA.
It starts there, yes, the chemical blueprint for how we're built.
Huh.
But it also includes our whole biological architecture, the structure of our brain, the chemistry of our nervous system, and what the sources call our innate, unlearned tendencies.
Our factory settings.
The factory settings,
Well,
exactly. The wiring that's there before the world starts plugging things in and running new software.
And we can see this stuff right from the get-go, can't we? The material you shared had some really clear examples of what nature predisposes us to.
Oh, absolutely. The classic, most obvious one is temperament. You can see it in babies. I mean, infants just hours old show these incredible differences.
I've seen that with my friends' kids. It's wild.
Yeah, it is. Some babies have what's called low reactivity. They're naturally calmer, they settle easily, they aren't as bothered by a loud noise. Others are highly reactive. They're super sensitive to everything, light, sound, temperature. Their little nervous systems just fire up more intensely. They're harder to soothe.
And that's not something they learned in the womb. That's biological.
That's biology. It's their intrinsic physiological wiring,
Yeah.
and it's significantly heritable.
So that foundational difference, that initial volume knob setting, that's what later scales up into what we call personality traits, right?
That's the idea. The sources talk about predispositions toward things like shyness versus boldness,
Mhm.
or a tendency to worry, which really just means having a lower threshold for anxiety to kick in. Even your baseline energy level has a strong natural component.
So nature sets a kind of range, a potential.
A reaction range, that's the term.
Yeah.
Your genes might set a wide bracket for a trait like, say, extroversion. Nurture then plays a huge role in determining where you actually land within that bracket.
And this goes for physical and mental potential too, I imagine.
For sure, things like your maximum possible height, your physical stamina, but also certain core aspects of intelligence, like how quickly and efficiently your brain processes information. And of course, it also strongly influences our susceptibility, our predisposition to certain illnesses or mental health conditions.
So the big crucial takeaway here is that we are absolutely not born as blank slates.
Not even close. We come preloaded with wiring and strong tendencies.
But, and this is the point we have to keep coming back to, predisposition does not mean destiny.
Absolutely not. It's the furthest thing from destiny. It just means you have a starting point, maybe a default setting. It might mean you have a genetically easier path in one area and a harder one in another, but it is only the beginning of the story.
It's the raw clay, not the finished sculpture.
Beautifully said. It's the default operating system, pre-installed with certain strengths and maybe a few bugs. Now we get to talk about how the environment starts updating and patching that system over a lifetime.
Okay, so let's flip the coin to nurture. If nature is the blueprint, nurture is. Well, it's everything else, isn't it?
It is everything else. It's this vast, pervasive, and nonstop stream of information, relationships, and experiences that shapes and directs that initial wiring every single moment of your life.
And it's so much broader than just your parents, which is what I think most people jump to when they hear nurture.
Oh, exponentially broader.
Yeah.
Of course, it starts with that immediate environment, the family, the presence or absence of love and stability, safety or fear. But it quickly expands to include your culture, the school system, your friends, the media you consume, and, critically, your socioeconomic context.
So things like poverty or wealth.
Yes. Systemic factors. Access to resources or lack thereof, exposure to toxins in your neighborhood.
Mm.
All of these are powerful shaping forces. They're all nurture.
So how do these forces actually work on us? It's not just like we're downloading information, right? They're physically changing us.
They are physically changing us. Take early care and attachment. A stable, loving caregiver does more than just provide food. They are literally teaching the child's nervous system how to regulate itself,
How to calm down.
how to calm down, how to feel safe. The presence of that stability and safety forges the actual neural pathways in the brain related to trust and emotional regulation. That's neuroplasticity in action.
So let's go back to that kid with the high anxiety temperament we talked about. Their nurture environment could send them down two completely different paths.
Completely different. If that child is raised in a chaotic, neglectful, or scary environment, that genetic predisposition toward anxiety gets amplified. It's like turning the volume knob to 11. They might become hypervigilant, distrustful, and really struggle to regulate their emotions.
But if that same kid with the exact same genes
Is raised in a super stable, supportive home, they are given the tools, the emotional scaffolding to manage that baseline anxiety. The nurture mitigates the nature.
and then there's the more subtle stuff, like just soaking up the culture you're in.
A huge, often invisible mechanism. Culture dictates our language, obviously, but also these deep, implicit values. Are you in an individualistic culture that prizes personal achievement above all else?
Or a collectivist one that prizes the group.
Exactly. Is it competitive? Is it cooperative? These cultural frames take the raw material of your temperament, say a natural boldness, and channel it In one culture, that boldness becomes entrepreneurship. In another, it might be seen as disruptive or aggressive.
And opportunity. Access to opportunity seems like maybe the most brutal and direct way nurture can override nature's potential.
It's absolutely critical. Nurture is the gatekeeper of access. Access to good schools, to books, to mentors, to role models. You
Okay.
can have the highest natural potential for, say, mathematics, but if you don't have access to quality education,
That potential just fizzles out. It might never be discovered.
it gets suppressed, it gets stunted, it might never be realized. The environment acts as the gatekeeper to the expression of that potential.
And what about the really hard stuff? The impact of things like trauma?
Trauma is a profound shaping force. Experiences of violence, neglect, or humiliation don't just affect your mood, they physically alter your brain's architecture. They can create these deeply entrenched negative beliefs like, I'm worthless, or the world is dangerous.
But the flip side is also true, right? Healing is also a form of nurture.
Yes, that's the hopeful part. The nurturing element of healing through healthy relationships, good therapy, or just moving into a safe environment demonstrates nurture's power to actively reshape those negative patterns. It can help build new, healthier neural pathways.
So the synthesis is really clear. Nurture doesn't build from scratch. It takes the biological hand you were dealt, the potentials, the vulnerabilities, and it develops them, or distorts them, or heals them. It's the director of the play that nature wrote.
I like that analogy. It guides the resulting person in a staggering number of possible directions.
This all sets us up perfectly to move into the modern scientific view. We're leaving behind that old, intellectual cul-de-sac of nature versus nurture.
Yeah, where they were treated like two opposing teams in a tug-of-war for your soul.
Right. And that old view was based on this flawed idea that things have to have a single cause, wasn't it?
It was a fundamentally mistaken premise. It assumed either genes or environment had to be the main cause, which forced this pointless argument over percentages. If you found a genetic link, the environmentalist would dismiss it, and vice versa.
But the sources you've looked at are crystal clear. Modern biology, especially since we map the human genome, is way past that battle. The focus now, across the board, is on interaction.
Interaction is the key word. They're integrated systems, not boxers in a ring. They are always talking to each other.
There's a simple analogy in one of the papers you sent over that I really liked.
The dimmer switch.
The dimmer switch, yeah. Nature sets up the possibilities, the tendencies, it installs the light fixture and the bulb, but the environment is the dimmer switch, turning the volume or the brightness up or down.
And sometimes the environment can even sort of rewire the whole system.
See, that's the part that's harder to grasp. If nature is the hardware, how can nurture possibly change the wiring itself?
Because the hardware is dynamic. It's not a static chip. It's constantly responding to input. It's designed to be updated.
Ah, okay.
So to stick with the hardware analogy, nature might determine the specs of your computer, the processor speed, the amount of RAM, but nurture is the software you install, the data you process, the viruses you might pick up, and the electricity that powers the whole thing. The hardware stays the same, but what it does, what it expresses, is entirely conditional on the nurture.
So let's ground this in some real-world examples. The case studies in the material were really helpful for showing how this interaction actually plays out.
Yeah, let's get concrete.
Let's start with anxiety again. The relationship between a genetic tendency for anxiety and a supportive environment. It's a perfect illustration of how nurture can manage a biological starting point.
Okay, so let's imagine a child with that clear genetic tendency. Their nervous system just reacts more strongly to new things, to uncertainty. That's their nature.
The high reactivity baby we talked about earlier?
Exactly. Now let's put that child in a specific nurture environment. A home that is safe, predictable, and, this is a key term from the research, high in maternal sensitivity.
What does it mean exactly? Maternal sensitivity.
It means the caregiver is attuned to the child's distress signals and responds appropriately and consistently. They don't dismiss the fear, they acknowledge it and help the child navigate it.
So they're essentially acting as an external regulator for the child's emotions.
Precisely. They co-regulate. And through that consistent positive nurturing, the child learns sophisticated coping skills. They learn to recognize the feeling of panic rising. They learn how to use their breath. They learn to challenge catastrophic thoughts.
So the genetic tendency for anxiety is still there.
It's still there, but the environment has built this strong, adaptive internal scaffolding around that vulnerability. The problems that the gene might have caused are drastically reduced because the nurture mitigated the risk. The dimmer switch was turned way down.
Okay, let's pivot to the second example, which is less about managing a vulnerability and more about activating a strength. Talent and opportunity.
Right. So imagine a child is born with some very specific brain wiring. That's their nature. That gives them, say, exceptional spatial reasoning skills, or maybe perfect pitch, a sign of potential musical genius,
So they've got the high-end hardware for that specific task.
a very high potential starting point, yes.
Yeah.
So what happens next?
Well, it depends entirely on the environment, on the nurture. If that child grows up in a home filled with music, with access to instruments, with good teachers, with encouragement,
Then the nurture is providing all the necessary inputs to activate that natural potential. But what if they don't? What if there are no instruments, no teachers, no cultural value placed on that skill?
then that potential just sits there. It might never come out.
It remains latent. It's the difference between having the most brilliant processor chip ever designed sitting in a drawer versus having it plugged into a supercomputer and programmed for maximum performance. Nature provided the chip, but nurture had to build the computer around it and turn it on.
This really reframes the whole question then. We're not asking, is it nature or nurture?
No, we have to stop asking that. We move away from the competition. We should be asking a much better, more useful question.
Which is?
How have this person's specific nature and their specific nurture worked together over their lifetime to produce the trait we see right now?
Whether that's their intelligence or their personality or their anxiety.
All of it. And that shift is so important because it moves us away from just assigning blame or credit and toward understanding the developmental mechanisms that we can actually influence.
Which brings us to how scientists even figure this stuff out. How do you untangle these two threads when they're so tightly woven together?
It's a huge challenge because in real life, genes and environment are almost always correlated. Smart parents tend to pass on smart genes and provide an environment full of books.
So the trick is to find situations where you can pull them apart.
Exactly. You have to find these unique populations where one variable is held constant and the other one changes. And the most famous tool for this is, of course, the twin study.
The classic gold standard. Because identical twins share almost 100% of their genes, while fraternal twins only share about 50%, just like regular siblings.
Right. And the key comparison is between identical twins who were raised together in the same home versus those incredibly rare and scientifically valuable cases of identical twins who were separated at birth and raised apart.
And the most famous of these is the Minnesota study of twins reared apart. MISTRA.
Mistra, yeah. It's a landmark. The logic is simple. If a trait is highly genetic, then identical twins raised in totally different families, different towns, even different countries, should still be remarkably similar for that trait.
And if the trait is mostly environmental, they should be very different, reflecting their different upbringings.
Exactly. And the findings for Mistra and other large-scale twin studies are incredibly consistent. For the big five personality traits, things like extroversion, neuroticism, conscientiousness, the heritability estimates are usually in the 40 to 60% range.
So a huge chunk of the variation we see in personality is due to genetic differences.
A very significant chunk, yes. But that means the other 40 to 60% is absolutely down to the environment and the interaction between the two. And crucially, even identical twins raised in the same house only share about half of their environmental influence.
Wait, how can that be?
It's what's called the non-shared environment. They might have different teachers, different friends. One might get sick and the other doesn't. One might have a specific traumatic experience. Their lives aren't identical, even if their genes are. And that non-shared environment is hugely powerful.
That makes sense. Okay, so next in the toolkit, we have adoption studies, a different way to separate the variables.
A brilliant way, because adoption neatly separates the genetic contribution from the environmental one. Researchers can compare an adopted child to their biological parents, who they share genes with, but not an environment.
And then compare that same child to their adoptive parents, who they share an environment with, but not genes.
Right, so if the child is more similar in, say, cognitive ability to their biological parents whom they've never met, that points to a strong genetic influence.
And if they're more similar to their adoptive parents in, say, their political views or their manners.
That's a clear win for nurture, for the shared environment. And the findings confirm this logic. For highly heritable things like schizophrenia, the correlation with the biological parents is much, much stronger. But for things like which religion you practice, the correlation with the adoptive parents is almost everything.
What do adoption studies tell us about something like intelligence?
They show that beautiful interaction. They show that while genetic potential absolutely matters, there's a clear correlation with biological parents' IQ. The quality of the adoptive home can significantly boost the realized IQ score, often far above what might have been predicted. Nurture is lifting the outcome.
And the final tool is the longitudinal study.
Yes, these are the marathon runners of science. They follow the same group of people, sometimes thousands of them, for decades, from birth into old age.
To see how things change over a whole life.
And to see how early traits and early experiences interact to affect later life outcomes. They let you track that continuous conversation between nature and nurture across time. You can see how, for example, a kid's early biologically based impulsivity interacts with their schooling, their first job, their marriage, and how that shapes where they end up at age 50.
So what's the one big consistent finding from all three of these methods? Twin studies, adoption studies, longitudinal studies.
The conclusion is unanimous. Virtually every complex human trait you can measure, from personality to intelligence to mental health, is a blend. Biology provides a crucial foundation. There is significant genetic influence. But every single one of them is also meaningfully and sometimes powerfully shaped and modified by the environment. The threads are completely interwoven.
Okay, so now we're getting into the really advanced stuff, moving from the general idea of interaction to the specific mechanisms.
Right, we need to go beyond just saying they're added together.
Yeah. What happens when the effect of one actually changes the effect of the other?
This is the core idea of gene-environment interaction, or GXE. And it's a game changer for how we think about vulnerability and resilience. The basic idea is that your specific genetic makeup can make you more or less sensitive to a particular environment.
So the same environment could be totally fine for me, but really harmful for you because of our different genetic wiring.
Precisely. The environment acts as a trigger, or a mute button, for certain genetic tendencies. There's this wonderful analogy of orchids and dandelions.
I've heard this. Explain it.
Some people, due to their genetics, are like orchids. They're highly sensitive. In a bad, harsh environment, they wither and do very poorly. But in a good, supportive, nurturing environment, they flourish spectacularly, more so than anyone else.
And the dandelions.
The dandelions are more genetically robust. They're less sensitive to their environment. They do pretty okay almost anywhere. They don't wilt as much in the bad soil, but they also don't reach the spectacular heights of the orchid in the perfect greenhouse. Their genetics make them less dependent on the environment for their outcome.
Let's apply that to the depression example from the sources. That's a powerful illustration of GXE.
Okay. So an individual inherits a specific version of a gene, often one involved with serotonin, that makes them genetically vulnerable to depression. That's their nature. They're a genetic orchid for mood regulation.
So they have that predisposition. Now, how does nurture interact with that?
Well, if that person grows up and lives in a low-stress, supportive environment with strong relationships, that genetic vulnerability might never, ever express itself. They might go their whole life without a single major depressive episode. The good environment acts as a mute button.
But what if that same person with the exact same gene
Faces extreme chronic stress or neglect or a major trauma? That harsh environment acts as a powerful trigger. It flips the switch on that underlying genetic vulnerability, leading to the onset of clinical depression.
So the gene didn't cause the depression on its own, and the stress didn't cause it on its own. It was the combination.
It was the toxic combination, the interaction. This is so transformative because it means genetic predispositions are conditional. They are not destiny. And it tells us that if we want to prevent illness, we should focus on improving the environment, on mitigating trauma, because that can literally keep these dangerous genes from ever turning on.
Wow. Okay, so if GXE shows us that the environment can trigger genes, then epigenetics, which is the next level, this shows us that the environment can actually get inside and change the operating instructions.
This is where the line between nature and nurture just completely dissolves. Epigenetics is the aha moment for a lot of people.
Give us the simple definition.
The simple definition is that epigenetics is the study of how experienced nurture can affect which of your genes are turned on or off without changing the actual DNA code itself.
So it's not rewriting the book. It's putting sticky notes on the pages.
That's a perfect analogy. The words in the book, the DNA sequence, they stay the same, but your life experiences are adding chemical sticky notes or highlights, or maybe they're stapling some pages together. These are tiny chemical marks, often methyl groups, that attach to the DNA.
And what puts those chemical marks there?
Your life, nurture, things like chronic stress, your diet, exposure to toxins, trauma, but also positive things like exercise, a healthy diet, a low-stress supportive environment. These experiences leave a chemical residue on your genome.
And these marks, these sticky notes, they tell your cells which genes to read and which ones to ignore.
Exactly. They control gene expression. They can tell a gene that codes for stress hormone receptor to be, wide open and easily read,
Mm,
or to be packed away tightly and effectively silenced.
yeah.
Your lifestyle is constantly modulating your epigenome.
There was a really powerful example with rats in the material.
The rat pup studies, yeah, they're
Yeah.
famous for a reason. Scientists found that when mother rats are high nurturing, meaning they lick and groom their pups a lot, that physical act of nurturing causes epigenetic marks to be placed on the pup's DNA,
Specifically on genes related to stress.
specifically on genes that build stress hormone receptors in the brain. The nurturing turns on these genes, and the result is that those pups grow up to be much calmer adults who handle stress really well.
Because their environment, their mother's care, literally changed their stress biology.
It fundamentally altered the expression of their stress management genes. And the pups of low-nurturing mothers showed the opposite. Those same genes were silenced, and they grew up to be anxious, high-stress adults.
And the most incredible part is that these changes can sometimes be passed down, right?
That's the most profound implication. These epigenetic marks, these memories of experience written onto the genome, can sometimes be inherited by the next generation. Nurture reaches into biology and leaves a mark that can last for generations. The boundary is gone. They're not two things anymore. They're one dynamic interacting system.
Okay, so since the mix is always different, we can't just put a single percentage on it for everything. We have to look at different parts of who we are, different domains.
Exactly. And this is all about general tendencies. It's never a fixed rule for any one person, but the research shows clear patterns.
Let's start with the easiest one, physical traits.
Right. Things like your eye color, your blood type, your genetic potential for height. These show the strongest genetic influence. Nature is really in the driver's seat.
But nurture still matters.
It still matters. A great example is height. The average human height has shot up over the last couple of centuries. The genes didn't change that fast.
It was nutrition.
Better nutrition, better health care, fewer childhood diseases, all nurture factors that allow more people to actually reach the height potential that was already in their genes. Your environment can stunt your genetic potential.
Okay, what about basic temperament, that emotional starting point?
Temperament shows very significant, often dominant genetic influence. It's deeply rooted in your physiology, but nurture is absolutely essential in shaping how that temperament gets expressed.
Give me an example.
A child born with high genetic impulsivity. In a chaotic environment with no structure, that impulsivity might lead to disruptive, even antisocial behavior. But in a highly structured, supportive environment, say one that channels that energy into sports, that same trait could become a huge asset. It could look like dynamic leadership. Same nature, different nurture, totally different outcome.
And what about personality as a whole, the complex adult version?
Personality is the ultimate collaboration. As we said, the heritability is high, 40 to 60%. But the rest is shaped by that unique, non-shared environment. A genetic tendency for extroversion might make you a successful CEO in an individualistic culture, but in a collectivist one, it might be expressed as being a community organizer. Nurture dictates the socially acceptable runway for the genetic airplane. Now for the big one, intelligence. Probably the most debated trait in this whole conversation. And it's a perfect example of potential versus realization. There is a clear, significant genetic influence on cognitive ability. That's the hardware's potential processing speed. But whether that potential is ever realized depends entirely on nurture.
On education, nutrition, stimulation?
All of it, all those levers of nurture can dramatically raise the realized IQ. And this is where socioeconomic status becomes just brutally important.
Explain that. This part of the research is fascinating.
Studies show that the heritability of intelligence, how much of the difference between people, is due to genes changes depending on your environment. In affluent, resource-rich homes where every kid has books and good food and great schools, the heritability of IQ is very high.
Why? That seems counterintuitive.
Because when the environment is uniformly good for everyone, it can't be the main thing causing differences. The environment is maxed out, so the only differences left to see are the ones based in genetics.
Ah, I see. And in impoverished environment.
Heritability plummets, sometimes to near zero, because the harsh, resource-poor environment becomes the primary limiting factor. It suppresses everyone's genetic potential, so it doesn't matter if you have the genes for a 140 IQ if you're dealing with malnutrition and a chaotic home life. The nurture is overwhelming the nature.
Wow. Finally, what about the things we assume are pure nurture, like our values and beliefs?
The content of our beliefs, our specific religion, our political party, is overwhelmingly from nurture, your family, your culture.
Yeah.
But there's a subtle role for nature, too.
How so?
Certain underlying temperamental traits have a genetic component. Things like your openness to experience or your need for certainty. A person with a high innate need for certainty might be drawn to systems that provide clear, unambiguous answers.
Whether that's a strict religious doctrine or a rigid political ideology.
Exactly. Nature might create the psychological appetite for structure. Nurture provides the menu of options for how to satisfy it.
The message is just so consistent. It's always a dance.
Always. And the choreography changes depending on the trait and the context.
This is so much more than just an academic exercise. Understanding this interaction model has profound effects on how we judge each other, doesn't it?
It changes everything about judgment, compassion, and accountability.
Let's tackle the big challenge here, the one I'm sure is on the listener's mind. If we say genes and trauma and poverty are so powerful, aren't we just letting people off the hook for their choices? Doesn't it kill personal responsibility?
That's the essential question. And the answer is that we have to avoid the two dangerous extremes.
What's the first extreme?
Believing that people are entirely self-made. The pure, pull yourself up by your bootstraps idea. If you believe that, you have no compassion. You blame people entirely for their poverty, their addiction, their anxiety, and you completely ignore the structural injustice or the genetic vulnerabilities that made their path 100 times harder than yours.
And the other extreme is just as bad, the idea that we're entirely determined by our biology and our past.
Yes, that's biological fatalism. It denies human agency. It says you're just a puppet of your genes and your childhood. It removes all responsibility and makes things like therapy or rehabilitation seem pointless. It treats people like they can never, ever change.
So the wise path, the one informed by the science, requires us to hold two seemingly contradictory ideas at the same time.
Compassion and accountability in a dynamic tension. The nuanced view says, yes, people are deeply shaped by forces they did not choose, their genes, their early environment. That calls for compassion. And once we're aware, we have a real capacity for conscious response and moral choice. That calls for accountability.
So this has to change how we think about public policy, too.
It demands it. If the environment is a trigger or a mute button, then as a society, we have to focus on building better environments.
It becomes an investment strategy.
It's the best investment strategy. It means prioritizing things like high-quality early childhood education, accessible health care, nutritional support. Because improving those conditions doesn't just make people happier. It literally maximizes the chance for positive genetic potential to flourish and minimizes the chance that negative vulnerabilities get triggered. You invest in the conditions.
And what about the nature side of the equation if we accept people have different starting points?
Then we have to abandon our rigid one-size-fits-all systems, especially in education. We have to accept that people have different cognitive wiring, different learning speeds, different emotional needs.
So more personalized learning, more support for kids with learning disabilities or anxiety.
Exactly. We have to accommodate the reality of genetic variation instead of pretending everyone is the same blank slate.
So the synthesis for good policy is you can't change a person's genes,
Yeah.
but you can change their conditions. And since conditions can change the expression of genes, that's our most powerful and ethical lever for creating a better society.
That is the fundamental takeaway for policy. It's where the science leads us.
Okay, let's bring this right back home to the listener, to the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. How does this deep dive fix our internal narratives?
The way you explain your own traits to yourself is so powerful. And there are two really common, really harmful stories people tell. The first is biological fatalism.
The I am what I am story. My anxiety is genetic, so there's nothing I can do about it.
Right. It leads to hopelessness and inaction. Why bother trying to change if your fate is written in your DNA? The second harmful story is the opposite. It's what you could call environmental perfectionism.
It's all my fault story.
Exactly. The belief that I was a blank slate, so any of my problems, my depression, my bad habits, are purely my own fault, a failure of my will. This leads to so much shame, especially for people whose struggles are rooted in biology or early trauma they had no control over.
So what's the healthier story, the one this science supports?
The healthier story is more complex, but it's so much more empowering. It starts with radical acceptance. I did not choose my starting point.
My genes or my early childhood.
Exactly. You were not responsible for the hand you were dealt. But, and this is the pivot to agency, I now have significant power over my responses, my habits, and the direction I choose from here on out. It's agency within a framework of predisposition.
And this leads us to the final concept from the sources, what you called conditioned freedom.
Yes. It's the space we actually live in. We're neither totally free nor totally trapped.
So let's spell out the conditions, the limits. What can we absolutely not change?
The limits are real, and we have to accept them. You cannot change the genes you inherited. You can't alter your early childhood. You can't change past events. Those forces have set your starting parameters and your specific vulnerabilities. That part of the story is already written.
But within that conditioned frame, where does our freedom lie? What can we actually change?
The freedom is in our capacity for conscious response and cultivation. You can learn new skills. You can build better habits, even if your temperament makes it feel like walking uphill in the snow.
You can seek therapy.
You can seek healing and support to build new neural pathways. You can, when possible, change your environment, move away from the triggers and toward the people and places that act as your mute button.
And we can always choose what meaning we give to our past and how we treat other people right now.
That is the core of it. We can choose how to act today, regardless of how we were acted upon yesterday. And that is the essence of conditioned freedom. Knowing your limits reduces shame for what you couldn't control. And knowing your freedom increases responsibility for what you can control right here, right now.
So after all of this, let's give the listener the final nuanced answer. How much are we shaped by nature and how much by nurture?
The simple answer is still a lot by both, but that's not good enough.
Give us the precise answer.
The precise answer is this. Nature provides the initial biological architecture, the raw material, the temperament, the range of potential, the specific vulnerabilities. Nurture, which is everything from your diet to your culture, then dynamically shapes, triggers, strengthens, wounds, or heals the expression of those biological elements.
They're not two forces, they're two threads woven into one fabric.
One inseparable, continuous fabric that is you.
And what does this mean for the listener starting tomorrow morning?
It means accepting a profound truth. You are not responsible for the genes you got or the childhood you had. Those things happen to you. But as your awareness grows, as you understand your own predispositions and triggers, you become increasingly responsible for how you consciously respond.
For the coping skills you choose to build.
For the environments you seek out for yourself. And most importantly, for how you choose to treat other people who are all walking around with their own complex and visible mix of nature and nurture.
And that really brings us to the final thought. The big shift in perspective this whole deep dive offers. The fundamental question is no longer the passive historical one. Was it nature or nurture?
That's looking backwards.
The question becomes an active, immediate, and much more powerful one for the present. Given my nature and my nurture so far, what kind of person do I want to become now?
And how can I help create the kinds of environments where other people can become their best possible selves too?
It shifts everything from explaining destiny to choosing a direction.
A perfect summary.
Thank you. This was a fantastic exploration. And thanks to you, the listener, for providing the source material for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.